Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So the Chancellor's constantly repeated theme is that he is putting the next generation first, acting now so we don't have to pay later. He admitted that the troubled world economy would hit government finances, but he didn't spell out where he planned to find the money, skimming over another round of unidentified spending cuts and a barely mentioned cut in benefits to disabled. Among the things he did mention, a rise in the tax-free personal allowance and the top rate threshold will mean tax cuts for 31 million people, with the middle classes coming off best. There's a package of help for small businesses, including cuts in corporation tax, capital gains tax and business rates. A new lifetime ISA for the under 40s, with the government paying in £1 for every £4 saved, up to £4,000 a year. And there will be that new sugar levy on soft drinks from 2018, raising more than £500 million a year to be spent on sport in primary schools and longer school hours for secondary pupils. But as our political editor Gary Gibbon now reports, many of the big decisions are being put off until after June's referendum.
A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, the medicine go down, medicine go down.
George Osborne stepped out to a nasty £52 billion sinkhole on his doorstep this morning. That's the impact of a statistical rethink that's decided the British economy is smaller than was thought only last November. Hovering above him, the cloud of the EU referendum and the political divisions it's brought in his own party. Number 10 had urged George Osborne not to alienate any MPs with anything too drastic. His first task, though, was to explain why money was even tighter than he'd thought 4 months ago in the autumn statement.
Financial markets are turbulent. Productivity growth across the West is too low, and the outlook for the global economy is weak. It makes for a dangerous cocktail of risks.
He plugged a huge chunk of the lost revenue from a smaller than expected economy with borrowing. But he cheered up his MPs with reductions in corporation tax, capital gains tax, and he took 600,000 smaller businesses out of business rates altogether.
A typical corner shop in Barnstable will pay no business rates. A typical hairdresser in Leeds will pay no business rates. A typical newsagent in Nuneaton will pay no business rates.
He raised the tax-free allowance for the whole UK and the 40p rate threshold for those in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. His party was less united when he warned against a leave vote on Europe, invoking the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility to support his case.
The OBR say this: there appears to be a greater consensus that a vote to leave would result in a period of potentially disruptive uncertainty while the precise details of the UK's new relationship with the EU were negotiated. And I believe we should not put at risk all the hard work the British people have done to make our economy strong again.
Labour MPs pointed at those Tories sitting in silence. And then came an eye-catching tax on sugary drinks. Some thought a last-minute confection to distract from an economy weaker than predicted.
I'm not prepared to look back at my time here in this Parliament doing this job and say to my children's generation, I'm sorry. We knew there was a problem with sugary drinks. We knew it caused disease, but we ducked the difficult decisions and we did nothing. So today I can announce that we will introduce a new sugar levy on the soft drinks industry. And let me explain
Outside, that got a welcome celebrity endorsement.
I didn't think I'd be getting this today when I woke up from Mr. Osborne. I wanted Mr. Osborne to be brave and bold, and he was.
The Labour leader said cuts to welfare had funded giveaways to the better off.
Well, 500,000 people with disabilities are losing over £1 billion in personal independence payments. Corporation tax has been cut and billions handed out in tax cuts to the very wealthy.
He promised this year borrowing would be barely £20 billion. It's going to be higher than that in 4 years' time. The long-term economic plan isn't. It has failed on all his key metrics.
The downsized estimate for the size of the UK economy put the country on track for a deficit in 4 years' time. So the Treasury wrenched some big revenues into different date columns to hit a £10 billion surplus in 2019-20, with the help of a massive £14 billion belt-tightening exercise now inked in for that year.
I think we'd say that is a big challenge. He's asking to consolidate £30 billion in the year just before a general election. That's more than the consolidation in any other year this Parliament. It's going to be hard work.
It's not what Chancellors normally do, is it?
It's not the normal Chancellor's pre-election strategy.
I commend to the House a budget that puts the next generation first.
George Osborne might be calculating that whatever happens, he won't be in this job in that year, and hoping that something positive for the economy turns up.
It wasn't really expected.
Today it was the Caped Kitchen Crusader who turned up.
Take care, guys.
One long-time associate of George Osborne acknowledged this might just be a policy devised to catch headlines when good economic news is in short supply.
Well, Gary, we'll be talking to you later, but as we've heard, the Chancellor has had to trim his growth forecasts and looks to be missing his targets on cutting the deficit. But he says the budget will still be in surplus by 2020. So how does he plan to pull it all off? Our business correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, has been ploughing through the budget books. And this sort of gloomy economic outlook and circumstance, how does he deal with that?
I mean, John, look, every year of the forecast, growth has been downgraded, if you have a look. And that is a massive shift in the outlook for the UK economy. We've heard a lot from George Osborne about the global cocktail of risks. But today, the OBR said that this was all about homegrown problem with productivity. I spoke to the chairman of the OBR earlier. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
The longer this period of weak productivity growth goes on, the more people are saying, well, maybe this is actually a longer term story and not just a consequence of the healing process after the financial crisis.
Look, productivity is a very, very complicated issue, one even the OBR finds hard to understand or predict, but it has a huge impact. I mean, look at the data. It takes the UK a day longer per week to produce the same that you get in France and Germany. So you can see it's a problem.
So what's the growth picture for the public finances?
Look, this is a disaster for the public finances. Add it together with low inflation and you can see the kind of problems. In 1 year alone, the forecast was suggesting that tax receipts would be £16 billion lower than they were forecast to be just 4 months ago. So this is a huge problem for George Osborne. And as you were saying before, he's had to abandon 2 of his fiscal rules. Now, amazingly, miraculously even, he is keeping to the main fiscal rule. That is to create a surplus by 2019-2020. And if you take a look at the breakdown, you can see that actually he is borrowing more to get to that surplus. And if you add all of those years together, he's borrowing almost £35 billion more. Now, what would that buy you? 70 new hospitals, 900,000 nurses it could pay for a year. So it's a lot of money.
So how does he really do it? Because none of these figures seem to sustain for more than a few months.
Well, there is a lot of fiscal shifting going on. There's a lot of loosening and then suddenly a lot of tightening at the end of the Parliament. I mean, there's an incredible 77 policy announcements today, all for a new generation, the next generation, but some are there simply to help the Chancellor with his sums. And if you take a look at the OBR document, the budget document, in that all-important year, the surplus year, you can see that there is almost £14 billion of tightening. Now, that is the biggest single dose of austerity that we have seen since 2010. Now, John, maybe by the time we get to that year, the OBR will have again shifted their revisions, changed their forecast, giving the Chancellor another opportunity to escape these difficult decisions.
Helia Ebrahimi. Now, we're joined again from Westminster by our political editor, Gary Gibbon. Gary, event, non-event, which?
Epic in the great scheme of things. George Osborne would probably like it to have been, but as we were saying, the instructions from number 10, if he needed to hear them at all, were don't frighten the horses. The party's in a bad state. And then, of course, he had the numbers problem, as has been outlining. I think George Osborne had, she was saying, these 3 rules that he wanted to stick to. The welfare cap's going to be bust, according to the OBR, every single year of this Parliament. He didn't manage the growth target. He was damned if he was going to miss the surplus one, at least in terms of how it's penciled in here, but he strains every sinew. The Treasury have just about come up with every trick Gordon Brown left them in the book to try and make sure they get that target in that column. But the OBR themselves say they're not entirely convinced it can be met. They say there's about a 50-50 chance it won't be.
Well, a sudden conversion on the matter of a sugar levy, because back in October, the Prime Minister was saying no such thing. We've got much better ways of dealing with obesity.
Yes, you can't help thinking that this had more to do not with obesity, but the emaciated state of the red box that he was holding in front of number 11. They needed something to say. You kind of think if this was always in the grid, there would have been the rest of the strategy to roll out. And as you say, it's really not very long ago they were telling us they wouldn't go down this path. So you can't help thinking a deal was struck, and we've got this policy, which no doubt George Osborne passionately believes in, but at a moment that wasn't at all planned.
And briefly, what's it done to the Chancellor's reputation? Enhanced or retarded?
Well, in terms of the MPs in there, some of them really don't like the sugar tax, but the really interesting dynamic is this new phenomenon of the very open split on Europe and how that has played into all of this. There are Tory MPs planning to rebel next week against the tampon tax and say that that's something that the VAT that shouldn't be set in Europe. They're hoping to get other people coming alongside them to vote on that. And I think there is a sense that George Osborne on that is absolutely going to come across the exact problem he was trying to avoid, playing into the problems on Europe that now beset his party.
Gary Gibbon in Westminster.
I've been